Alright, so to get this tutorial started off, you want to begin your duster pattern by starting off with a front and back basic bodice block. So you want to go ahead and grab your front and back basic bodice block. And once you have that, what you want to do is, so you don't pretty much damage your original bodice block, you want to go ahead and trace that on some new pattern paper, craft paper, or whatever you choose to create your pattern with. So go ahead and trace out your front and back bodice block and make sure you give yourself room, a little bit of width, and also a lot of length, because you'll be making a duster that is a lot longer than the actual two bodice pieces. Alright, so for the first thing that we're going to be doing, we're going to be adjusting the center front and the neckline area on the front duster, because instead of it being on fold or having a center and pretty much ending in the center of your body, we're going to be cutting that portion away because it's going to be an actual duster. So it's going to be two pieces in the front. So you want to start here at that point where your shoulder and your neckline meet. And from there, you want to mark a straight line down pretty much the length of the duster that you want. So you measure like the measurements that you took when you measured from your neck, from the front portion of your neck all the way down to how long you wanted your duster. Mark that length from this point here where your shoulder and your neck hole meets. Pretty much draw a line. It don't have to be like super long, but just long enough to where you have a guideline. Draw a 90-degree angle. Pretty much draw your hem at a 90-degree angle from this duster length side or center that you just created. Go ahead and draw the hem on the bottom. Alright, so now what you want to do, now that you've created your hem, you want to go back up to that armhole and that side point where those 2 points meet. You want to draw a line going down to that hip point and then going down to the hem. So you want to make sure that you're drawing a straight line just going down to that hip and then drawing another line going down to that hem. It's not going to be another line. It's going to be the same line. It's just that I want to make sure that you understand that you will be drawing a line from this point down to this point and through this point to the hem. So it's going to be one line. So your new front should look something like this here. And go ahead and erase this additional hem that you may have drawn out like I have here. Go ahead and erase that. And then we're going to go ahead and move forward to the next step. All right, so what I did was I went ahead and transferred my waist line and my hip line onto the duster pattern here, and then I deleted the neckline. I erased the neckline, and I also erased that center front as well because we no longer need that. So it left me with this portion here. This is the new front piece for the duster here. Now we're going to go ahead and work on the back. All right, so now working with the back, what I want you to do is go to your front and measure the new side. Measure along the new side here, because what we're going to do is transfer that number length over to the new side for the back. So we're going to do the same thing we did for the front here on the side. We're going to do that to the back. But what we want to do is make sure that they equal the same length, because then what we're going to do is adjust the length of the center back to line up with that new side. So go ahead and do that. Go ahead and measure your side front, the new side front that you just created. Then go ahead and transfer that length over to the side back. Drawing a line down to the hip and then down to the rest of the length of the side. All right, so here is my new line here. And what I want you to understand is when you're creating the back line on the side is going to curve out slightly. It's going to have like, not necessarily curve, but it's going to have an angle. It's going to slightly kind of have an angle because your hip portion in the back bodice, if you followed my step-by-step instructions on how to create the bodice, because I created a little bit differently maybe than some, I don't know, But what I do is with the hip portion of the bodice on the front, it's I take away 0.25 inches in the front and I add that 0.25 inches to the back because of the buttocks and the because the back pretty much curves a lot more than the front. So with your duster tutorial or your duster pattern here where you're creating a new side, as you can see in the front, the line pretty much goes straight down. But here in the back, the line is slightly angled to where it's looked like it's twisting or turning just a little bit, slightly. It shouldn't be that dramatic. Well, it depends on your measurements. But for this particular segment here, or for this particular pattern that I'm doing right here that I'm showing you, as you can see, it's not dramatically different from a straight line, but it is different. So what I want to do is probably draw a straight line just so you can see the difference. Hold on just a second. All right. So as you can see here, this line here, this is the line that's going straight down. And as you can see, it kind of cuts off that hip portion here just a little bit. But this line here, because I measured down to the line and then I measured the rest down to the hem, I made sure that the line was slightly it pretty much by doing that, the line kind of slightly angled or just a little bit. So I did want to make that clear that the back is going to have a little teeny weensy bit of flare than the front, but it's not going to be dramatic. Now moving forward, we're going to go ahead and transfer the length of this center back to the center or center to the side of the new side of the back, since this hem here or this side here is the same length as this side here to the front. It's going to all be pretty much, that's a good way to keep up with making sure that you're creating the same length for both the front and the back, due to the fact that the neck curves are different and the shoulder placement is also different for the neck and the back. So if you try to measure it from one point, if you try to measure it from the shoulder and apply that length to the back shoulder, it's not going to be the same length for the front and the back. So in order to make sure that you're creating the same length for both the front and the back, work with the sides, because the the sides pretty much, I'm sorry, because the work with the sides, because the sides pretty much will give you more accuracy, of course, on the pretty much maintaining the same length for the front and the back. So let's go ahead and transfer this length here over to the center back, and we're going to do the same thing that we did in the front. We're going to go ahead and just draw a straight 90-degree angle line as a guideline to go ahead and elongate or add more length to the center front. All right, so as you can see here, what I did was I created that new hem from the new side length, and then I went ahead and lengthened that center front to meet that new hem. And what I'm going to do, like I did here in the front, I'm going to transfer my waist and my hip and then get rid of that new side. All right, so as you can see, we've completed our front and our back, our new front and our back duster pieces. And what I want to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and make all of my adjustments the same color as my pattern, because we're going to do a little bit more to this pattern to create a different look. All right, so this is the final pattern for the front and the back duster. Now, if you just wanted a plain old duster look with just the nice sleeves and just the nice open duster, then this will be all you need to create that. But what I'm going to be doing in this tutorial is creating something a little bit different. All right, so the next step in creating this look, what I want to do is go ahead and make our marks and our placements on our actual patterns for our duster of where we will be placing our pockets and also our tie for the duster. All right, so now what we're gonna do is mark our tie belt where our tie blah, 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 blah. All right, so now what we're going to be doing is marking where our tie belt will be sewn onto our actual duster, and we're gonna mark that on the back pattern, the back duster pattern. I said duster. We're gonna be marking it on the back duster pattern. So we're gonna go to that waistline on the back duster. We're gonna go down 2 inches, and then we're going to draw a line here going across. All right, and this is how it should look here. So now what we're going to do is go to this line here, and from this side only, the center back, from that center back, we're going to go in 2 inches and make a notch, or mark a notch point right there to where we're going to create a notch. And we're going to go in 2 inches actually on both this line, this new line, and also the waistline. All right, so as you can see, I'm still working on my back bodice piece, or my back duster pattern. And what I wanted to do was just give you a little close up of how I went in 2 inches from that center back and made 2 notches there. And what I want to go ahead and do is just go ahead and just draw a complete line from this waistline down to this new line that we created here. Go ahead and just draw a line, pretty much creating a closed rectangle. All right, so as you can see here, after going in 2 inches from my center back, I created another line connecting those 2 points from both of those lines, and I created a closed rectangle here. All right, now, so to the pockets. For the pockets, we're only going to be working with our front piece here. So what we're going to do is start off at the center front of the pocket, the new center front of the pocket. We're going to go down to that hip line, and we're going to go in 2 inches on that hip line. All right, and now from that new point there where we went in 2 inches, we're going to go down the length of our actual pocket. So we want the length of our pocket to be 5 inches long. We're gonna go ahead and go down 5 inches from that new point. All right, so I went down 5 inches, and we want our pocket to be 4 inches wide. So I'm going to, from that point where I went down 5 inches, I'm going to go over towards the side 4 inches. All right, so all I'm going to do now is just close up this rectangle here by creating a line going up, back up to that hip, going back up to the hip line. All right, so we just formed our pocket placement area here on our front pattern piece. Now let's go ahead and get into the trim of the pattern. All right, so now that we're getting to the trim and the rest of the duster, I want to go ahead and make a note that you will need a basic sleeve to complete this tutorial. And I already have a video tutorial on how to create the basic sleeve, so I'm not going to be including that in this actual tutorial. So go make sure you check out the info bar, the description bar below, and go check out that video to create the basic sleeve to go along with this duster. And I would also like to note as well that I do have a basic bodice darted and dartless pattern with the sleeve included on sale on my website for just a couple of bucks. It's not that much or whatever. And it's pretty much a PDF pattern package. And you just download the PDF pattern, assemble it, and cut it out, and you can use that. I will be posting a video about my PDF patterns because I just now kind of launched them, and I'm starting to launch a few. I'm going to be launching some more, so I'm going to make sure I put that video up as well, since I'm plugging it into this tutorial here. Now, okay, so now that we have the basic sleeve pattern discussed and out of the way, make sure, like I said, make sure you go check out that video. We're going to move on to the trims. Now, for the trims, you're going to be needing, if you look at the picture, you're going to be needing the neckline trim. You're going to be needing a hem trim, a tie belt pocket trim, and also sleeve trim. So if you look here on the screen, I do have it here where I give you the formula of how you calculate the neckline trim, the hem trim, the tie belt, and the sleeve trim, and also the pocket trim. Yeah, so now for the trim, let's look at the neckline trim. So for the neckline trim, you want to measure the front center length and the back neck curve. to get the length of your neckline trim. So all right, and for the neckline trim, you want to make sure that the width of the neckline trim is 4 inches wide, because you're going to be folding that over in half, um, pretty much creating like a width of 2 inches, and then you're going to be sewing it, attaching it to the duster. Okay, so let me explain this for the neckline trim. Now, this is going to be, remember that the pattern, okay, so let me say this for the neckline trim. Remember that the patterns that you're working with the duster is only half. So the front pattern that you're working with is only half of the front, and the back pattern that you're working with is only half of the back. So this full neckline trim is only going to be half of the duster. So you're going to be cutting out 2 pieces of this and then sewing it together to create the full neckline trim for the full duster. Now, what you will see me end up doing of sewing when I'm sewing the actual tutorial or sewing the piece together is folding this thing in half. So by finding the center of that, I folded it in half because it made it easier for me to cut it out in the fabric, and you're going to see that in the video. So that's an option for you. You could either pretty much create half, find half of that front and back neck length, or the front center length and the back neck curve. Find, pretty much divide that number in half and create the pattern from there. But you want to make sure that you mark that center on there, so you will be knowing, so you will know that you need to line that center up on the fold of the fabric to create the full length, and then you'll still be cutting out 2 pieces, as if you would if you kept it full. You'll still be cutting out 2 pieces. So like for an example, here on the hem trim, you will need to measure the front hem and the back hem. So let me show you what that looks like, what part of the um, pattern that you need to measure to get the hem trim. All right, so as you can see here, you need to measure the front hem and the back hem, and that's going to help you get the hem trim. So measure the front and the back hem. Now, I don't want you to pay attention to the seam allowance that I've already put on my pattern, because you're going to add the seam allowance after completing the patterns completely. So after completing the trim patterns for the duster from the duster patterns, I'm sorry. Let's say that again. So after completing all of the patterns, that's when you then add the seam allowance to all of the patterns. So understand that before I added the seam allowance to my front and back patterns, I measured my length first. I measured all the things that I needed to measure for the trim before I added the seam allowance. So make sure you take that into consideration. All right, so that was the hem trim that I just showed you, and you want to make that one as make the length of that one 4 inches wide, or 4 inches in length, and that will complete your hem trim pattern. Now the tie belt will be your back waist plus your waist to hem length. So you're going to measure the back waist line. You're going to measure that back waistline on your pattern, and then measure down from that waist all the way down to that hem, and that's going to give you your tie belt length. And you want to make that 4 inches, as far as a 4 inch wide rectangle. So as you can see, all of these trims are rectangle patterns. They're pretty much rectangle squares or rectangles or whatever. So they're really, really simple to make. You just have to follow the formula. All right, and now for the pocket pattern, you want to just do a 4x5 rectangle. I believe that was the, yeah, that was the length. Pretty much you want to measure the pocket, which is a 4x5 rectangle. Mine is a 4x5 rectangle. You can make yours however big you want it or whatever, but mine is a 4x5 rectangle. So my pocket is going to be 4x5 inches on this tutorial, and the pocket trim will be 4x4 inches, because you're going to be folding it in half and you want it to be the width of the pocket. Now for the sleeve trim, you want to take your wrist circumference, which you pretty much want to measure this bottom portion here of your sleeve. your wrist portion, and then you want to make it 6 inches in length, because you want, when you fold it in half, you want it to be a little bit thicker, because if you look in the picture, you see that the sleeve trim is a little bit thicker than all the rest of the trim on the pattern. So I mean on the garment. So you want the sleeve trim to be, when you fold it over, 3 inches versus 2. So that's why it's going to be 6 inches in length. Now, for the pants pattern, for this particular tutorial, which I'm going to include that in this tutorial as well, like constructing the whole outfit. And I do have a pants pattern tutorial on how to create a basic pant pattern with the darts. So I'm going to link that in the description bar below, along with the sleeve pattern, like I said before, and the basic bodice pattern, like I said before as well. And you want to make sure with your pants waistband that you make sure that you follow along the tutorial, because the tutorial pretty much tells you how to create the waistband. But for this particular waistband, in the length, I want it to be 3.5 inches versus 4. In the video, I believe I put 4 inches. And for this particular look here, I don't want the waistband to be so wide. I want it to be a little bit thinner. So I made the length 3.5 inches. So that will be the only adjustment for this particular tutorial versus the pants pattern tutorial that I put on, that I'm putting the link in the description bar below. So now that we've gotten all of that out the way, I want to go ahead and show you the seam allowance for everything. So now let's look at the basic sleeve for this tutorial now. I added seam allowance on both sides of the sleeve and on the hem of the sleeve. I didn't touch the armhole curve at all, so don't place any seam allowance on there. Don't place any seam allowance there. Now for the neckline trim, I placed seam allowance completely all around the neckline trim. Now, if you choose to do, like, pretty much use that front and back center length and cut it in half and just mark the center, and you want to pretty much do it in a way where you place that pattern on fold to make it easier to cut, then make sure you understand that wherever you see the center, pretty much where you placing something on fold, that side does not need seam allowance because you're placing it on fold. So that means you won't be adding a seam there. It's going to pretty much be closed. So any place where you see center, do not add seam allowance. So if you choose to cut this pattern in half and mark it as center and then cut it out on fold on the fabric, do that, but don't add seam allowance on that center line. Now here you're seeing that I added it along the entire neckline trim because it's not going to be placed on fold. This is not meant to be placed on fold. Now for the hem trim, you want to add seam allowance to the top, the top and the bottom. You don't want to add seam allowance to the center and then the other side. So don't add seam allowance to the center and the other side, just the top and the bottom. For the tie belts, you want to add seam allowance all around except for the center, like I stated before, because that part is going to be on the fold of the fabric. And for the pocket and the pocket trim, add seam allowance all around, both rectangles, both the rectangle and the square, all around the pocket and pocket trim, seam allowance all around. And then for the sleeve trim, you will need seam allowance all around. And for the waistband for your pants, you will need seam allowance all around as well. But this one right here, I included the seam allowance so you don't see the seam allowance on there. But yeah, I think I've pretty much covered everything for the pattern. So let's go ahead and get into putting the pattern and constructing the pattern pieces to create this beautiful garment.